About this, I'm joined by Africa political analyst Aisha Kaji, who's joining us via Skype tonight. Aisha, a very good evening to you. So in order to give context to what's going on in Sudan now, we have to go back to 2003, violence in the Darfur region. About 300,000 people are said to have died in that violence, and that is why we're here.
Absolutely, and even those numbers are a conservative estimate. Certainly, millions more were displaced both internally and externally from the Darfur region because of the policies of Omar Al-Bashir's government against the civilians in Darfur. Particularly, the government's use of militias and paramilitary groups such as the notorious so-called Janjaweed, or devils on horseback.
And you talk about the 300,000 figure of people who are said to have died during the violence in Darfur, and you say that is even contended because it's said to be a conservative estimate. But also key to bear in mind is that the now former president is accused of violence and other atrocities beyond Darfur.
Yes, beyond Darfur, certainly he's accused of atrocities even in the most recent uprising, which led to his ouster last April. But in terms of the International Criminal Court, he is wanted on charges of war crimes, genocide, and crimes against humanity, which are the totally serious level crimes that the ICC was set up to prosecute. So Chief Prosecutor there, Fatou Bensouda, has said that Sudan needs to hand over both Omar al-Bashir and 4 others for whom an indictment has been issued by the ICC.
Just in terms of the impact of an ICC trial on al-Bashir, what impact would that have on the internal situation in Sudan? I mean, it's great internationally to see a former head of state being held to account for alleged atrocities, but in terms of the country moving forward, how is that likely to shape Sudan's future in particular?
Well, I think that, this decision that the government has made, or had the indication that it's made that it may extradite al-Bashir and the other 4, is essentially a concession made in the peace talks with so-called rebels in Darfur, rebel groups. And it is an important concession because it has long been a demand of these rebel groups in Darfur that he be handed over to the ICC. They are saying that given the scale of the atrocities that happened between 2003 and up to indeed 2010, 2011 even, in the Darfur region, there is a need that justice must be seen to be done by the inhabitants of that region. And in fact, several news outlets have been covering, interviews with victims of the Darfur violence, and many of them have said that they never thought to see this day. However, a note of caution here, because while the government has indicated that it may extradite him, the process towards that extradition is going to be lengthy, just as the peace talks themselves, which are currently happening in Juba, have been lengthy and are likely to continue for some time.
That brings us to the point about the scrutiny that the International Criminal Court itself is going to face once the ball is officially rolling, because we know the IEC has been accused, or the ICC, I beg your pardon, has been accused of deliberately pursuing just African leaders, and even in that pursuit, failing to secure convictions on a very long charge sheet.
Absolutely. And while the ICC process has been slow, some of the culpability for that failure to secure convictions must actually lie with countries themselves, and indeed countries on this continent, many of which have refused to extradite people for whom the ICC has issued warrants, etc. So, we had cases such as that of Charles Taylor, for example, where, he tried several times to escape justice and eventually never actually came to justice. So the process is a lengthy one because the level of these crimes against humanity, genocide, war crimes, these are not crimes that can be prosecuted easily. They happen at a very high level. The burden of proof is extremely high. And when people like Al-Bashir are tried and convicted in country, or the attempts to bring them to justice in their own countries or even in their own regions, we've seen that many witnesses are intimidated, that there are cases where witnesses are not just intimidated but actually murdered. We've seen, for example, with attempts to bring current President Uhuru Kenyatta of Kenya to justice for allegations against him during the post-election violence some years ago. We've seen there that, for example, witnesses have been intimidated, witnesses have disappeared, and there's been a lot of shady dealing around these kinds of cases. The Charles Taylor case, the Kenyatta case are just two cases in point. So the reason we need the international court is to have that level of objectivity. And therefore, as I said, the burden of proof is extremely heavy.
Aisha Kaji, thank you so much for speaking to us on the latest developments out of Sudan.